Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Secret Resume podcast, hosted by me, Melody Moore. In this podcast, we explore the people, places, and experiences that have shaped my guests, those which have influenced who they are as people and where they are in their work life today. You can listen in as we have a rich exploration of often unexamined and undiscussed, but very important aspects of their lives, or as I like to call it, their secret resume. My guest today is Resh Sonchhatla. Resh is a former accountant and the co-founder of the cult West London Indian restaurant Chapati Club, which sadly closed in 2022. She now works for the marketing startup Datahawk. She creates supper clubs and pop-ups, and she also mentors and consults with small food startups. Resh lives in Windsor with her partner Hina and their 2 children. So welcome, Resh. It's really exciting to have you here today, this afternoon. You and I met only a few months ago, but I was really keen to get you on the podcast because I think that you've got a very interesting story, an interesting secret resume that listeners will be really happy to hear about.
Thank you for having me, Melody. I appreciate your time and thinking of me in such a high light.
So let's start, shall we, with your corporate career. Do you want to say a little bit about what you were doing, a little bit about that period of your life?
Yeah, sure. I graduated from uni in 1998. Studied business and accountancy. Didn't really enjoy it whilst I was studying it, but I just felt being Indian and not being given the choice almost to explore anything more creative, I had the choice of being a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant. So I guess I tried to take the most easiest route out, but it wasn't. So I studied accountancy, went on to work for BMW, and I spent about 9 years with them. At the same time, I studied my CIMA exams in accountancy. And then I moved on and worked for Centrica for about another 6 or 7 years. They head up with their own British Gas. And then I in between these roles and then my next role, I took a bit of a travel break. Hadn't really fitted in much traveling because I went from uni to straight into a corporate career. So I've got
no gap year.
No gap year. So I did a bit of South America and a bit of India and Australia. And then when I went to India, I was fascinated with food. I've always been fascinated with food, but it sort of really resonated with me because I was actually seeing it happen, in my face. And came back and I was like, I'm going to explore. I even explored just going around being, I guess now they are food critics, right? But back then there wasn't such a noise about it. So not a food critic, but just go around, go to a restaurant, write up about it. I thought, okay, maybe that's what I could do. Anyway, the job offers were coming in and the money got the better of me. So I went back into another career in private equity. And then whilst I was in this career, just before I started, actually, I met my partner, Hina. And we, at the time, we knew that we wanted to be together. We knew that eventually we wanted to have a family. And the whole time I was in private equity, there was no room to breathe, for yourself, let alone trying to think about fitting a family into that mix. Time went on. I was probably there for 6 years, 7 years, and towards the end of that period, we did start to try some IVF. I had my eggs collected. Hina had her eggs collected. We found a sperm donor, and we started our IVF journey. And it just wasn't working, And I think, in hindsight, now I look back, I was like, the stress levels were really high. The pressure was on. We were spending a lot of money trying to have this family, and things, and it puts you in a really dark, bad place because you've almost always got what you want, because you worked for it, be it your career or your body, and then you're trying to get the one thing that you really want, and it's not happening for you. And I think for both of us at the time, it really did knock us quite a few times. And then it got to a point where I thought work wasn't helping. I was not enjoying my work. And I just really wanted to explore food and how could we bring the food that we grew up on to a restaurant table in a very casual environment, nothing fancy, but bringing our upbringing. I grew up in the 80s, graffiti, hip hop music, R&B, old school tables and chairs. Like how can we create this Indian food vibe but keep it really sort of low budget, cheapy? And one day I'm just sat at work, go on Dalton's Weekly, and I find this unit in Acton.
And was that something you typically did, look at units? Was it you sort of...
I think I was just having a really bad day. I was having I've always been interested in like properties and stuff like that, but no, I think this is one fundamental day. I was like, this isn't really, I need to get out of here. I need to change my life a bit, for the better.
And what was it that you were trying to get away from? What was that environment like?
I think I got, for the whole of my life, you're just chasing that paycheck almost, and you get to a point when you can't, when money's not buying that thing that you want, you think, okay, money can't buy happiness. It definitely can't, So we thought, okay, something's got to change here. Your mental health suffering, don't really care about the money anymore. Something's got to change. And opening a restaurant, I thought at the time, would be like the change that we needed,
Okay.
being creative and doing something that really matters.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to pause you there before we dive into the restaurant and how that came about. Can we talk a bit more about IVF? And when we were talking before, about maybe some of the challenges that you experienced being Indian, being gay. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I grew up in Southampton, a very small Indian community where everyone knew everyone. My parents are very integrated into the Indian community. So growing up, as a teenager, yes, I knew that I wasn't probably going to marry an Indian guy, and I was just trying to put it off. And I'd get, my parents would get phone calls. It was like, and my parents, don't get me wrong, they're not traditional Indian people. They weren't like, you've got to have an arranged marriage or anything like that. They just wanted to see me settle down with an Indian boy. And in my head, I thought, how am I going to get out of this? How am I going to get out of this? And for me, I thought, okay, if I leave, so when I went to uni in London, I thought, okay, this is my escape. I'm never going to go back to Southampton. I can live in London, be who I want to be. No one needs to know, I thought short term, but not long term into how I was going to do this. And as time went on, I was then sort of in my 30s and I met Hina, and I thought, this feels real. This is the time I've got to now present my true self, because I was living a lie for 35 years of my life. No one that was close to me actually really knew me. They didn't know the real me. They just knew Resh, fun loving, likes going out, but from my core, no one got to know me, because I was never going to be truthful with you.
Even your close friends?
No, maybe one, but a lot of my friends, when I did end up telling them, they sort of just rolled their eyes and they were like, yeah, we knew, of course we knew. But they were never going to ask me. And when I met Hina, I was like, okay, this feels real now. This is what I've been probably waiting for. So after a short period of time, I was introduced her to my family, and it was hard, you know, it was never going to be easy, because my parents, they were probably thinking about, okay, what's everyone going to say? It's something for people to talk about in the community. And whereas for me, I was done. I, you know, sort of lived 35 years of like living in this like box where I couldn't be myself, and it becomes that thing where it's not my problem anymore. You know, I've got to like let this go. And my parents, yeah, it was difficult at the time. It was difficult for about a month or two, I think, from what I remember. But after that, you know, they spent time with Nina and got to know her, and you know, like anyone else, she's just a human being, you know, a really decent human being. So then things, you know, slowly got better, and then, you know, we moved in together, we bought a house together, and that's when, you know, the thing with the corporate career was getting quite difficult, where I just, you know, I thought, okay, I've changed this part of my life. I now need to move on to the next chapter and do something about this career I'm in that is really damaging my mental health, you know.
Do you think that the kind of braveness it took to come out and to let people know that true side of you meant that maybe you were more able to do that in your career as well? It's almost like aligning everything more to who you are and what you wanted.
Yeah, because even in my career, no one knew I was gay, and I couldn't, because you're working in a very white dominated male environment where you're trying to climb the ladder, and you think, right, if I now say I'm gay, this is just going to throw it out of the park. I've got no hope, you know. So even at work, I never came out. And people would ask, you know, you seeing anyone? And it's just like a non-conversation, you know, because I was so used to it. I was so used to just lying, you know, so to speak. Then when we got the restaurant, you know, we moved away from it all, and I left the career and moved into the food industry. It was almost like I was just leaving this world behind me that I've almost never been in, you know. It's like a parallel universe of some kind.
What did it feel like to constantly not be able to tell the truth about yourself?
It's really difficult, because you're lying about everything, you know, everything. You're lying about what you did last night, to what you did at the weekend, where you went on holiday, who you went on holiday with. Everything became a lie. And now it's like, who was I trying to protect, you know? Because it wasn't protecting me in any way. It was damaging me to my core. So yeah, I can't believe I was that person sometimes. When I look back, I can't believe I was behaving like that.
So because I think it's quite an interesting story how the restaurant kind of came about in the first place. So you were having your IVF, it wasn't working. You had a number of rounds.
With a number of rounds, we'd remortgaged our house to pay for it all. And there was a point where, I don't know, there was some money left in the bank, and I said to Tina, this isn't working. We need to make some sort of a shift in our lives, because if this doesn't work, where does it leave us as a couple or as a family? And it's almost like we still needed something, you know. So I went, you know, I saw this unit. It wasn't that expensive in the big scheme of things, you know. Found a chef, did the unit up on a really low budget, created the menu, and bear in mind, I had no idea what I was doing. I had never even worked in a restaurant, let alone trying to open one.
So you'd never waitressed? No.
I'd always worked for my dad in his shops. I'd never worked in a food world before. I didn't know what GPs were. I didn't know what my food margins were. I didn't know anything. I guess I just had this idea and I ran with it. And thankfully, with Hina's support, she helped with the design side. We met a consultant chef, who helped us bring the dishes we grew up on, evolve them into something that could be sustainable in a restaurant environment, and created a really small menu, probably about 10, 12 dishes on the menu.
I'd say some more about, you said the food that you grew up on. So that was Kenyan Indian food for both of you. That was your the food you'd grown up on at home.
At home, yeah. So myself and Hina grew up in very sort of vegetarian. Our mothers are vegetarian. So the food we ate every day was actually, I'd say, more vegan. Vegans become such a big thing now, whereas that's what we grew up on. We didn't have cheese or cream, or so in retrospect, our diets were very vegan probably. And if we wanted to have, if I wanted to have a chicken curry or something, I'd run down to my aunt's house on a Saturday and have it there, because we knew that we'd be able to get something there that wasn't vegetarian. And the food, growing up, both Hina and I, because we're both Gujarati, and your mum or your dad would make a big pot of dal or curry of some kind, and then there'd be chapatis just being made on the go. And we both come from quite big families, so you'd have your mum just stood at the gas stove, like rolling chapatis and cooking them. And that's where the name for the restaurant came from, because it was just like a big pile of chapatis on the table, a curry or a dal, and everyone just tucked in and shared. And we felt that was something that was really missing from the food world and the way people eat. I know there's a lot of communities and countries that you all get bits of food and you share it, but this is just two things. You get a bowl of dal and some chapatis, and that's it, and you just share. And that food has always brought joy, and it's always the center of sort of love. It's like where people connect at the table. So we really want to bring that to a restaurant environment, and that was the reason the menu was quite small, because we really wanted to encourage the sharing and not make it too complicated. And it was honestly just honest, good food,
So when you say sharing, people would share from, the same dishes, it would just be kind of in the middle and people are diving in.
Yeah. And it was just, and even now, we still eat like that at home, and it's just a very wholesome way to, because it doesn't matter where you come from or what you've done or what where you've come from in life. When you come to the table, you're all the same people, because you're all eating the same food, and that was such an important part of what we were trying to create.
So you invested your IVF money into setting up the restaurant.
Yeah. And then we opened the restaurant eventually. We got the keys in December 16, and then we opened the doors in April 17. And a week, so the way we bought our IVF was you have to buy rounds of IVF. So we bought 3 or 4 rounds in this last package. And we had one more go of IVF left, and it was booked for, we opened the restaurant on the 7th of April to customers. And on the 17th or 18th of April, we had another round of IVF booked. And my stress levels were out of the window, off the Richter, because I had no idea, what the hell I just stepped myself into. I'd left this amazing corporate career to having 0 sleep, just, trying to make this thing work, from nothing. And I remember saying to Hina, can we please cancel this round of IVF? Can we postpone it by a month? Because I just can't invest my energy into it right now. And it wasn't me going through it, it was going to be Hina, but emotionally I needed to be very available, and I just felt I wasn't. And Hina thankfully said, no, we've got it booked, I've taken the drugs, it's happening.
And for people who don't know anything about IVF, it is, I think it's easy to not understand the injections, the impact on your hormones. It's you don't just rock up, do you?
No, you have 3 or 4 weeks of injection taking, drug taking, scans. Your body feels like it's been hit by a bus. Your stomach's swollen, everything feels tender. And so there was all of that to go with it, and then it hits your mental health and your emotions, and you're all over the place. So it wasn't easy on either one of us in that sense. Hina was going to be doing the carrying, and on top of all of that, we weren't talking to anyone about it because we'd been through rounds of IVF, hadn't worked, and we're like, let's just keep this to ourselves for now, because it's hard enough without having everyone asking you, how's it going, So this time, we went into London on the 18th, had IVF, had the transfer done, and went home. And then you have to wait for 2 weeks and do a pregnancy test. And Hina got up, went to the bathroom, and then she came in and we were pregnant. And 5 years old now.
Wow. How did that feel? That was just after the restaurant opened, yeah?
Yeah, 10 days later. Yeah, it was incredible, and we opened the restaurant on the 7th of April, and he was born on the 7th of January. So it's like the number 7 then started like evolving in our lives in a crazy way, lucky number 7, eh?
Indeed. So tell me a bit about, 2017 then you started the restaurant. Did it do well at first? How did that first kind of year or so go?
Yeah, it was incredible. We sort of hit the ground running. We were busy like all the time, people queuing on a Friday, Saturday night to get in, get a table. It just blew up, and I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was food or us or the music, or and the where it was in Acton, it wasn't the best spot. It's quite, it wasn't the best spot. But people travelled to come to us, and we had the support of the community, amazing community, and things were really good. Things were really, really good. And then 3 years later, we had COVID.
Just before we dive into that, because I know that's a big thing in everybody's life. What was it like having a tiny baby and starting a new business?
For me, it was, it was really. Well, he went back to work after a year of having him, and I guess I was able to be at home during the day, which was quite key. And if you think, if I worked in Liverpool Street, there was no chance I was going to ever see that kid. I was leaving home at 6:37 in the morning, not probably coming back till 8-9 o'clock at night. So I think, from a family perspective, although I was working late nights, I had the luxury of leaving home at like 6:37 in the evening. And I'd come home at midnight or whatever, which was fine. But I had the daytime, I had the daytime to like be at home and be with family, which I think that you just can't put a price on that.
Yeah.
Knackering, but amazing.
I bet. So you went from working crazy busy in the city, it sounds like, to working crazy busy in the restaurant.
Yeah, and doing everything. I didn't have, a business partner. We didn't have any investment. It was all our own money. You have chefs that are another species altogether that you have to contend with. And I think, what the hardest part of it all was, I think, having to deal with people that you're completely relying on. And the scary moment of like, you could lose control to a chef in the kitchen, or, a staff member not turning up to work to pull a shift, which would completely rock the boat. I don't know, I don't know how we did it, but we did it. There'd be days like the cold room would break down, or the freezer would break down, always something, right? Always something. And you can't plan for these events. You can't plan for things to go wrong, especially in the restaurant environment. There's no disaster recovery plan, so to speak. So we just got through it the best we could.
And have you always been someone who's good at dealing with a crisis or those last minute pivots?
Yeah, I'm like I'm a bit of a planner, like I like to know what's going to happen next. I don't like surprises. But in the world of hospitality, I don't know, maybe there is now, but I don't know how else you plan for such things. You literally have to take each day as it comes and hope that people come and sit on your seats and eat and drink.
And they did.
They did.
And then COVID came along.
Yeah. I remember driving in, I think it's the day it got announced that, things are going to close down or start to close down. I was driving to the restaurant, and it was I think it was a Friday night, I can't remember. And I remember it just being so busy, like unbelievably busy. And I thought, what is going on? What, have I missed something here? But it seems like the public were tuned into something that I clearly wasn't as a business owner. And it's almost like they foresee that, that we weren't going to be open for like 2 weeks at the time. And that's what we were told, right? But we were and even when time moved on and we did close, and we decided initially that it wasn't safe for our staff to travel in, because a lot of them didn't live nearby, so they'd go on buses or trains, and we made the decision not to open at all. And then that was in March. So what happened was we were pregnant again at that point with our little girl, and Hina was 7.5 months pregnant in March. So that was the part of me that was so scared, because I thought, we cannot open we didn't know what the hell COVID was, what it was going to do. I couldn't risk going in. I couldn't then say to my staff, okay, well, you go in, you guys open the restaurant. But they were the ones sort of begging to like get out of the house, at this point. They're like, look, we're going to be in a kitchen, we're not going to let anyone into the restaurant space, let's just reopen. So I had to sort of leave it to the team to organise that and do that. And I think the community really welcomed it, because nothing else was opening at the time,
So that was opening for takeaway?
Yeah, just takeaway.
And had you already been doing takeaway?
Yeah, thankfully, yeah. So
okay.
we were on all the apps and we were doing takeaway. We then got a contract with it was an organisation called Meals for the NHS. So that would be, we'd make pots of food up for them, rice, curry, and that would get delivered to hospitals locally. So what we started to do was, just on the days we were going to be prepping for the NHS, we opened in the evening for ourselves. Sometimes it'd be 2 evenings a week, sometimes it'd be 4 evenings a week, just trying to limit the amount of time the team had to leave their house or be outside.
How did that come about, the NHS contract?
I can't remember, to be honest. I think it might have been something just, something Instagram-y or LinkedIn-y.
Not that you were in a pub with Matt Hancock.
No, definitely not. But and it was and that was really good, because it meant that we didn't have to, I don't know, it's almost like you want to do something philanthropic back, right? If you're going to open for yourself, it's good to kind of open for another reason too. And we had a baby on the way, so I guess that meant a lot in that sense. So then our baby girl arrived in May. We were still, I'm pretty sure, in lockdown at this point, quite hard. I was able to go to the hospital for like delivery for like an hour, and then got sent home. And then still trying to like operate the business virtually, which is difficult, when it's something that needs physical goods in and out. So I remember doing silly little things like going to the restaurant in the middle of the night to drop things off or pick things up, just when no one was there, right? So I couldn't contaminate myself, so to speak. And this carried on, and then the restaurant, it just carried on mulling over really nicely, and it tinkered well.
Was it were you turning over as much as you had when you'd been open?
Much, yeah, just as much, if not more, yeah. Because people were treating themselves, right? People were getting an extra this or extra bottle of wine, or just really treating themselves, because they didn't have anything else to spend their money on.
No, well, they weren't going out, were they?
No.
Okay. So that carried on through. I mean, we kind of talk about COVID happened, or it's kind of, I think people are forgetting even now dates, and there was that much change, wasn't there? But that kind of carried on throughout the sort of multiple lockdowns and things. That it was. Did you reopen at any point from people going in and then have to close again, or did you just stay?
I think because of my family circumstances, we didn't choose to reopen in the windows that they offered. The only time I remember reopening was for the ETAP Help Out scheme. Yeah, people went crazy, and then we continued it. We continued it ourselves into September as a bit of a marketing ploy. And then it was open shut for like the rest of that year, or another year. I can't remember now, but a lot of opening and closing, a lot of bookings, losing a lot of bookings, losing a lot of money, losing a lot of stock. It was quite insane, and then staff, being furloughed, not being furloughed. And it just got, things got quite complicated in that sense. And that was 2020, 2021. We got through it. It was very difficult. It was a very difficult year, because the opening and closing, but we did everything we could in our power to like keep the place running. And then it got to 2022, so about a year ago, and things were just going from being okay to bad, and then going from bad to worse. And I think people that habits changed, habits changed, not getting takeaways as much, not eating out as much, not treating themselves as much in that sense. Maybe they chose to go on holidays instead, or go elsewhere. And I think being a sort of community-based restaurant, that was the hit we took at that point.
So you had reopened to guests in the restaurant at that point?
Yeah.
But things just slowed right down.
Very much so, yeah.
And the same on the takeaway side?
Yeah, it's takeaways got worse. And it's difficult, because you have to have your team in no matter what. You can't plan for having a quiet night, because you don't know when that quiet might come. So it was a real shocker, I think, to have this amazing business that was real buzzing and had a vibe, to, oh shit, you know, been really quiet. And then that conversation continued for a number of months, you know. And on Friday, Saturday nights, we'd be turning people away normally, and we were struggling to fill the place. And this carried on most of last year into the summer. And then I knew that the summer was going to be hot. And normally summers don't really impact us because people still want to eat curry. But I thought, knowing that we'd been so quiet going into a really hot summer, it was going to kill us. So then we decided we would just pull the plug on the place and close down, because we were just hemorrhaging money at this point, you know. And it was getting to a point where, how am I going to pay the staff next month? Which is a horrible feeling. Then last July we closed the doors officially. Yeah.
And what does that feel like, to kind of have that dream that you had and having to walk away from it?
Yeah, it's soul destroying, because it's something you've dreamt of. Well, for me, I've sort of dreamt of it my whole life. Taking it to the point where, you know, it's reality. Investing your own time, your own blood, sweat, tears, and money into it. And you know, future proofing it in the sense that thinking, okay, this is something I'm doing for the, you know, this is something Ian and I were going to do for the kids, right? We wanted them to sort of have it as their legacy almost, you know, because it felt so good, you know, it felt so right. So when we did close, yeah, I went into a little black hole for a couple of weeks for sure.
It's a little while ago since you closed, and I wondered if you had any thoughts on things you would have done differently, advice you'd give to others, any reflections on that?
Things I'd do differently. I say this, and I don't know if it's the right or wrong thing to say, but possibly should have scaled a bit quicker. Because I feel that could have been one of my biggest fallbacks. You know, there was opportunities, there was not investment, but you know, people that I would have had support from. And I think I probably should have moved quicker, earlier, because I think possibly things might have been a bit different for me.
In what way?
You know, it's just the scale of the economy, right? If you know, I studied finance my whole life and I didn't put it into play, which, you know, I kicked myself about. But I don't know. I don't know. I really don't. I don't know if that would have been the solution to all of this. And you know, having had a really small family at the time as well, whilst this was all going on, it meant my focuses were much more on what was probably going on at home than, okay, how am I going to scale this business? And don't get me wrong, I don't regret that. My family will always come first. But who knows? Maybe find out in another life.
And what are you doing now? What's your current focus? Where are you spending your time?
I'm currently working with a startup, still in the hospitality world, sort of marketing CRM. So I'm doing some work with them, and also still a tiny bit of consulting work for small startups, doing some mentoring for, again, small hospitality startups, which I'm really enjoying, seeing other people flourish. Really nice.
Yeah, I bet. And you can bring all of your experience, both good and bad, to to the consulting and advice you're giving to them. Okay. So speaking of advice, if I was to ask you to give some advice to your younger self, any age younger self, what might that be?
I think it would have been, just be so cliche, but really being more true to yourself as soon as you feel the need to. Because I think all I did by not talking about myself or not coming out, or I just hindered my progression. So I felt, when I was the age of 35, 36, okay, I'd come out in a relationship. And then it's almost like I speed tracked everything that I was waiting to do for the 20 years prior to that. Because I think having a restaurant and not have been fully out would have been so hard. If you're going to run a business, you really need to be true to yourself. I don't appreciate people that are business owners and where you can't really see their personality. And I think the restaurant for us really showed us as people. So I think just come out as soon as you can and live your life.
Okay, love that. And what would the title or a strap line for your story be, do you think?
My favorite band in the world is Soul to Soul. And my anthem for life has always been Keep On Moving. It's my favorite song in the world. It just resonates so well with me. And if only I'd taken that advice when that song first dropped, that would have been ideal. But I think that's what it was. I think I loved the song so much from when I was a kid. And it's like it sat with me so well, but I knew that I couldn't. But now, keep on moving.
Keep on moving. Thank you, Resh. I'm going to finish now. Thank you so much. I have no more questions. You'll be glad to hear. So thank you for sharing your story. It's a very personal story and you've been really honest and open. So I really do appreciate you sharing that with us.
Thank you for your time, Melody. You've been amazing.
Thank you. I was really struck by Resh's honesty and ability to talk about some really difficult and challenging parts of her life. The challenges of being gay and Indian and hiding a large part of herself from everyone in her family, her friends and the corporate life, and how damaging that was to her in the very core of her being. And also the devastating loss of a business that clearly she and her partner Hina really loved and really enjoyed, and which had been a really long time ambition for them. I can't begin to think about how difficult that must have been. And I really also enjoyed not just the difficult challenges that she talked about. I was really drawn in by this the restaurant that they created, and I really love this idea that it doesn't really matter where you've come from or who you are, that you're the same person, or that you're all equal when you sit down to the table because you're all eating the same food. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Secret Resume. If you did, remember to like, share, comment and subscribe, as that helps people like you find people like us.